Hey, it's Mose. Welcome back. So I've been pretty hyped about Wilds. Is anyone else hyped about Wilds? Like, can we get like a vibe check going on? Cause man, that's looking good. I've been non-stop watching all the different gameplay and videos and stuff from Gamescom and the stuff that came out after. I'm completely hooked. Now instead of consuming media, it's time to produce some media with this video. I'm talking about returning monsters. You know those monsters throughout the series that you just can't seem to get rid of no matter how many times you kill them? I'm talking about them. If you're not familiar with the history of returning monsters, I'll give you a quick rundown. Every new Monster Hunter game comes with a variety of brand new monsters, but some monsters from previous games are also added as well to fill out the roster and make the world feel more alive and consistent. Throughout the series, there are some monsters who have shown up in almost every game or generation. Therefore, it's expected that 5th generation will also have at least some monsters who are very likely to start showing up in the new 6th gen games and beyond. But I don't want to just wildly speculate. I decided to do some research and see if I could find some commonalities or trends in previous frequently returning monsters to make some educated guesses on 5th gen's monsters. I started by making a list of every monster who has missed either 0 or 1 generations. In the case of 4th gen monsters, I only counted them if they were also in a 5th gen game, because a single generation game can't be counted as a trend, really. In 1st generation, we have Rathalos and Rathian, both of whom have never missed a game, as I'm sure you know. Then there's Diablos, who only missed a single game with base Monster Hunter 4 but returned in 4 Ultimate. Kezu, who skipped all of 3rd gen but has been present in every generation outside of that. And Basarios, who again skipped all of 3rd gen but can be found in every other generation. An interesting one to note here is Gravios, who by all rights should be in the same camp as Basarios, since the two of them basically always go hand in hand since they're technically part of the same species, but somewhat inexplicably, Gravios got skipped over in Rise, meaning he's now relegated to an only sometimes monster. In 2nd generation, we got, you know him, you love him, you can't pronounce his name, T-Rex, who, since his debut in Freedom 2, has been present in every generation somewhere. There's also Daimyo Hermitar, who is a bit scant on the amount of actual games they're in, but do manage to make their way into every generation outside 3rd. Rajang is another series standard from 2nd gen you basically always expect to see before very long. Kushala Daora and Teostra are always inseparable and can be found very commonly. And capping out the 2nd gen returners is Nargacuga, who only made the list because of Monster Hunter Generations, but it still counts. Coming into 3rd gen, there's the ever-present Baroth and Royal Ludroth. Zinogre is a truly staple monster of the series, nearly on the level of Rathalos with how prevalent he is, only missing base world since his debut in Portable 3rd. Devil Joe is a fan favorite and only skipped out on Rise. Brachydios seems more like a dev favorite more than anything else with how many games he's in and how often you'll end up using his gear in endgame. Agnactor again technically makes this list because of generations, much like Nargacuga. And finally, much to some people's disappointment, there's Uragon. You already know his story. Of the 4th gen monsters, Seregios managed to weasel his way into 5th gen. Musitsune, Glavenus, and Astalos left their fated 4 companion Gammoth behind to become the returner trio in 5th gen. Pour one out for Gammoth. Valstrax is in 5th gen, sort of. Crimson Glow Valstrax is a variant and the only Valstrax type present in 5th gen. There's not a whole lot of precedent for this, but we'll count it. And last, but certainly not least, we have the entire Megala family, with Gore and Shigaru only missing worlds since their introduction. Even Chaotic has maintained his presence. That poor guy probably needs a break, though. So, now we have our monsters all laid out in a neat list. What can we extrapolate? Well, after some thinking, I believe I've nailed down some criteria that make for a good series mainstay candidate. A monster should have one or ideally more of the following qualities. Number 1 is habitat diversity. Being able to live in a multitude of different biomes and locales is a great boon to being able to fit into just about any game. If I had to guess, the developers probably make the locations in the games first and then decide on the monsters, so monsters like Rathalos, Tigrex, Deviljho, and Astalos fit into this category very well. Secondly, and in relation to the first point, they could live in very few common biomes. This fits monsters such as Diablos or Uragon, who basically only inhabit deserts or volcanoes respectively. Essentially, every game has a sandy hot region and a volcanic region, meaning monsters like this can be slotted into those games easily. The third quality they could have is to just be a fan favorite. Capcom does love their fan service monsters, and nowhere is this more obvious than with monsters like Rajang, Zinogre, and the various Magalas. Monsters that people just love to fight and want to see them come back and get updated for every new game. And fourth, a monster should have unique and interesting mechanics and or ecology. Monsters that bring interesting fights, armor skills, ecology, and so forth are a huge benefit to any game they appear in to help bring some diverse gameplay and world building. I'm looking at monsters such as Mizitsune, Kushaladora, and Valstrax for this one. One last quality that I don't think really counts here, but it is worth mentioning, is that most often, barring title updates, returning monsters fill out the early to mid-game ranks, so returning monsters do have a decent trend of being ones that can be slotted into those parts of the game, rather than huge endgame threats or very early game punching bags. Now that we've got our history and analysis out of the way, we can talk about 5th gen. I think I've narrowed down a small list of monsters that make for good candidates as series mainstays. I'll start with ones I think are most likely and move on to ones that are less likely from there. So, to begin, I don't think I even need to go through any of the previous stuff to figure this one out, and you probably already know, but it's Anjanath. Anjanath basically ticks every single box. He can go almost anywhere, people generally like him, and he's a good early to mid-game threat. He even comes packaged with his own interesting subspecies as a bonus. I would almost put money on seeing this guy show up, maybe in Wilds, but definitely somewhere in 6th gen, at least, and beyond. Next up is Puke. This guy is in a similar boat to Anjanath. Pretty standard mid-tier monster that fits a lot of places, has a lot of fans, and so forth. Now, Tetranodon from Rise is an interesting one, I think. His locales are a little more limited, but can probably be put any place with water. He has some fun gimmicks in his fight, and he adds some diversity in monster types, being an amphibian, which is a very uncommon type in the series. Aknosam is the next one. Aknosam is a bit harder to make a case for because it's a bird wyvern, and it seems in recent games if they want to add a bird wyvern, they just make up a new one rather than dredging up someone from the past. Not to mention the slots for bird wyverns usually seems pretty low, and Puke is higher on this list and also a bird wyvern. However, it does meet the criteria, and I think it's a step above a punching bag like a lot of other bird wyverns are, so it's getting a spot. From here we'll move on to monsters that I think are definitely less likely, but still solid options. These are the guys that might skip whole games or even a whole generation, but they'll be back before very long. First up is Tsitsiyaku. I feel like this guy is fairly forgettable as far as 5th gen monsters go, but he's got a gimmick that is only shared by Gypsyros, and he's just an objectively better monster. He could fit into a lot of biomes and add a neat gimmick to the ecology and gameplay when he's around, so I feel like we'll probably see more of him. Tobi Kadachi is next on the list, and I feel like having him this low down might surprise some people, but he's just not really unique or interesting enough, I guess. He can fit into a lot of common biomes, potentially, but that's about all he's got going for him. He can make for a good filler pick if you need a thunder monster in a forest or something, I guess. Gosrog is a monster that I think has a lot of fans behind him. He has a really cool fight, and while he basically only fits into snow biomes, they're prevalent enough that he can make it into just about any game. The big thing holding him back, in my opinion, is that his mechanics could be a little over the top for a mainline game, depending on how grounded they're trying to go in any given game. I think seeing him in future portable titles has a high likelihood, though. Also, give him a subspecies, please. Dodogama has almost nothing going for him in terms of mechanics, ecology, or value to a game. However, he does have a lot of people who really like him, and I feel like it's probably enough to get him into some more games. Nergigante is an interesting monster to discuss here. He has flagship privilege, and he's a huge fan favorite, and he can fit into practically any biome, and he has unique mechanics. You might think this would make him a top contender for a mainstay monster, but there is one issue that's holding him back on this list. Ecology-wise, he eats elder dragons, right? So naturally you find him in the New World where there are an unusual abundance of elders as part of the story. Speculating on future additions to ecology and lore is beyond me, so I can only say based on what's currently known about him is it's unlikely to find him in very many places. They did make Shigar Megala more abundant in Sunbreak, so it's not like there's no precedent here, but it's not something I can make guesses on. I think he's probably like a sleeper mainstay. They'll make him work where they want him if they want him in the game that much. So, you know how no one really liked Gyarados and then they added him to Rise because he kind of just fit the ecology and they wanted a Piscean? Don't worry, I'm not suggesting Gyarados. I'm talking about Somnicanth. I don't think anyone actually liked this guy, and they gave him a subspecies in Sunbreak, so clearly that doesn't matter. He's got some unique stuff going on and can fit into most games, so I feel like, much to some people's disappointment, we might be seeing more of the Sleepy Siren before long. Before we move on to the final section of the list, I do want to point out, perhaps, an elephant in the room. Why isn't Paolumu on the list? By all rights, he fits here. Unfortunately, considering Paolumu would force us to consider Nightshade Paolumu also being added in the same game, and that simply must not happen. Thus, Palumu is not considered. Thank you for understanding. So for this last section, we have monsters that I think, hypothetically, would make good mainstays, but I'm not sure it's possible according to current knowledge. I'm talking about the Rotten Vale denizens. The Rotten Vale is a biome that is entirely unique within Monster Hunter, and the monsters that inhabit it are fairly tailored to the ecology here. Odogaron, Great Gyros, and Valhazak particularly are all good and interesting monsters that would certainly add value and excitement to any game that has them. However, short of including a region that has similar ecology, or a change in known ecology for the monsters, they would have no place in any game. Again, they kind of sit in a similar camp to Nergigante, I think, where if they really want to bring these guys back, they'll just make it work. So there is one last monster I want to talk about, and that's my personal pick for a monster I want to see become a series mainstay, and one that I think actually has a pretty good chance to be one to boot. That monster is Velkhana. Velkhana has it all. Former flagship, can show up literally anywhere, has a good fight, interesting gimmick, and I believe it's the only ice monster that can show up outside cold areas, so that's cool. And finally, this is an important one for me, they have a unique armor skill with Frostcraft. Frostcraft is an awesome skill that's really fun to use. I genuinely think every game would be better with Velkhana in it, just straight up. So, in conclusion, I'm just making all this up, and who's to say what monsters are going to be coming back? But you already knew that. Honestly, the biggest decider on returning monsters is probably just whatever monsters the devs like, but that doesn't make for very good speculation and discussion, so we'll ignore that for now. I tried to be somewhat logical about my guessing, and looking into this stuff was interesting anyway. I think it'll be interesting a few games from now to see if I was totally off on these predictions or not. I'm sure I hit a couple, at least. Anyway, that basically wraps up this video. Hope you liked it. Let me know what you think about returning monsters and what 5th gen ones you want to see come back. Hit me with some of that engagement if you want. See ya.